Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is January 26, 2023. This is our 132nd episode. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. This is a show about revolution, and it is for revolution. It is a show about the world, and it is a show for a radically new world. Today, we're going to be getting into the danger posed to the entire world, to all of humanity, posed by the war in Ukraine, and we're also going to get into the political situation in this country on the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade being passed in 1973, and its overturning in the past year, and what that means for the fate of millions of women, but also for the prospects for revolution. But before we get to those segments, we want to get into and at least tell you a bit about what this show's about, and I can't think of a better way to do that than to get some of my crew who's behind the camera to come right over here and sit down and tell us about the show, because hearing from them will bring out some of the reality of what we're really doing here. So Atlas, stop with the sound and get down here and make a joyful sound about revolution for our audience, sir.
Hey, Andy, how you doing?
I'm doing good. So Atlas, you've worked on this show since the very first season. We've been doing this for 3 years. I think it'd be important for you to talk about what you've learned about revolution, about the show, and particularly focusing in on why it matters for this audience that we have now to really take this show up and spread it so that tens of thousands of people see this show, and also people can get involved in working with us. But let's just focus in on what you've learned about revolution and about the importance of what we're doing here.
Yeah. Well, the main thing that the RNL show is doing is it's bringing to people an understanding of the world. What's going on in it? Why is it happening? And where do the interests of humanity lie? And in that, each week what we're doing is we're trying to sift through and understand all the different events that are going on. What's happening with the environment? You know, why are black and brown people being murdered by police? What's going on with the oppression of women, the taking away of Roe versus Wade? And in all of that, what we're doing is we're trying to apply the scientific method and approach brought forward by Bob Avakian, the new communism. So on the team, you know, we're getting deeper into that. We're learning how to apply that, and we're applying it to understand in real time the world as it actually is. And we want to bring that to people. That's a big part of what this show is.
Yeah, you know, I just think it's important that people understand that what it means if you're trying to bring about a radically new world, to get rid of all these forms of oppression, to have a revolutionary leadership. Bob Avakian came out of the struggles of the 1960s, worked with the Black Panther Party in that time, became a revolutionary, and took inspiration from the first socialist revolutions in the 20th century. But he developed the science of revolution much further. And in what we call today the new communism, he's written a constitution, which is actually a blueprint and a vision of a new society. And there's a strategy for revolution. This is all something you learn when you get into the show. And I think you've probably learned yourself through the course of working on the show. So one of the things we've done in the past year, which we do want to draw your attention to before we plunge into today's episode, is earlier at the end of 2022, during the fall, I had the opportunity, along with the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show, Sunsara Taylor, to interview Bob Avakian in 3 interviews that are available right at the top of our YouTube page, the RevComs on YouTube. And there's nothing more important for you to actually get into than to listen to these interviews. They're really extraordinary, and they give you a window into the kind of movement we're building today, the kind of society and the kind of people we're aiming to be by understanding and seeing what Bob Avakian is like. We say that you'll see in these interviews, as we get really into things and he tells stories about his life, his heart and soul for the people of the world, and how he's really hardcore for a revolution, not just so that we can replace one set of rulers with another. That's not our objective. Our objective, Atlas, is the emancipation of all humanity. So I'm thinking we should go to the show now, but then you need to come back here at the end of the show and let's talk about how people can get involved in the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Sounds great.
All right. All right, so we're going to get into the recent developments in the Ukraine, and I'm here with Lenny Wolff, a colleague, comrade. Welcome to the RNL Show again.
Well, thank you, Andy, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this. It's very important.
Well, it is important, and it's one of these things where there's a dance going on here, and it's a deadly dance, and we're going to bring that out to people. And what are the stakes for humanity here and around the world, and what is it that people in this country need to do? So we're going to play some news clips right off the top that are going to set the stage.
Tanks.
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 Tanks to fight Russia.
We're really hopeful that the coalition for providing Ukraine tanks, because for us, tanks for Ukraine are tanks for freedom.
This could be seen as an escalation by Russia and thereby lead to a wider escalation in the war.
The U.S. is sending $2.5 billion in more ammunition and weapons. Tanks are, for now, a step too far.
It doesn't include tanks.
Germany has suggested they would not provide their own tanks unless the U.S. did the same. It's a major reversal.
A major shift for the U.S.
Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine.
We have a window of opportunity here.
Sending Abrams tanks now sends a clear and unambiguous message to Putin that we will stop at nothing to defeat him.
All right, so I hope those clips gave you a sense of the deadly dance that is going on and the stakes of it. And I just want to, before we get into it, which is going to be where we're going to start, I want to just run by this quote from the deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev. He sent this in a telegram message to Western leaders, and he said to them who are ratcheting up the war, delivering weapon after weapon, he says, speaking, of course, of Russia, the loss of a nuclear power in a conventional war can provoke the outbreak of a nuclear war. Nuclear powers do not lose major conflicts on which their fate depends. This should be obvious to anyone, even to a Western politician who has retained at least some trace of intelligence, end quote. So, Lenny, this quote sums up, sarcasm aside or taken into account, the deadly stakes of this and where this could all head. So we want to talk some about this ratcheting up.
Well, I think one thing to understand is over a whole course of time, the United States has continually raised the ante. They said, we won't do this, we won't give that, we won't give Zelensky that. And then they've done it. They've pushed and pushed and pushed. And it's had an effect. The United States has been able to arm Ukraine, to give them the strategic understanding, to give them the intelligence necessary to hold back the Russian offensive. And so it's at a point now of a stalemate. But now what's happening is both sides are looking to actually escalate this in a way that's going to be very dangerous for humanity.
Yeah. What I would like to do, just to a little more set the stage here, is play a little snap of a podcast that the New York Times put up earlier this week on January 19th with Sabina Tavernisi and one of their main international correspondents, Eric Schmidt. And I think it captures some of this deadly dance we're talking about.
It seems like there's a pattern here, right? I mean, basically, Ukraine asked for some sort of weapon. The Biden administration debates whether to provide that weapon, eventually does provide that weapon. And that decision allows Ukraine to fight back against Russia in a new way, which then causes Russia to have to change its tactics to deal with that new weapon. And that sets off a whole new cycle of exactly the same thing.
That's right. We've seen this through these phases we've described, whether it's just the initial defensive phase to pushing back on the artillery. And now we've come to the next phase of this, which is what kind of new combat power can the West rush to Ukraine that they can learn to operate quickly that'll make a difference on the battlefield.
And it strikes me that as the months go on, and we increase these weapons supplies, bigger and stronger ones, there are fewer and fewer places to go in terms of increase, right? We've ticked up a lot. And at the same time, the risk is greater, a risk that we will trip over one of Putin's red lines and spark a nuclear conflict. So in a way, it turns out that Ukraine doing better and potentially being able to win this war has led to a place of greater risk.
So it's worth noting that Sabina says, it seems that the better Ukraine does, the more it ups the risk. And that's actually precisely right. And in a certain sense, maybe the New York Times is preparing people for that, or at least they're discussing what's actually going on. Because the dynamic that she's describing, and they describe here, is one in which one side does, Russia invaded, illegal, illegitimate, criminal, all of that, and then thought, as Bob Avakian pointed out last year in the interviews that we did with him on the RNL show, that perhaps he miscalculated and that he thought it was going to be an easy run. It turned out not to be that. And Biden and the main NATO powers were able to amass very quickly a response and give Zelensky a lot of munitions and tactical advice, and to halt that. And then this has been going back and forth. First, Russia does something, and then they get the weapons to counter that. Russia then figures out how do they move in relationship to those weapons. And so then that requires more weapons. And we've just seen this dance. In fact, just in the last 6 weeks, we've gone from Zelensky and the Ukrainians asking for Patriot missiles. The U.S. saying, no, that's a line we're not going to cross. He comes to the U.S. Congress, makes a speech that then the ruling class all claps for, and a lot of people who should know better joined in that applause, at least in their heads, and then they get the Patriot missiles, and whoa, it turns out that's not going to be enough because Russia's amassing, and they've just conscripted close to 500,000 people to throw on the front lines, to throw right at Ukraine, and now that means that Ukraine needs tanks. And the tanks have just been approved. So we've got a situation that's just being described there of ratcheting up. But the question is why? What are the interests here? What is actually being fought over here? And we have said on this show, and I think we should get into it more, this is a proxy war between two imperialist powers. That yes, you were pointing this out earlier, that in the beginning of the war, it might have been a legitimate war of the Ukrainian people for their sovereignty, but very quickly it came into one where it was a big power war of imperialist contention. So I think we should get into that to see where are the interests of humanity.
I would like to kind of, just for a minute though, continue to try to bring home this dynamic and the risk involved in it for people. Which you correctly described. It's not Zelensky who's driving this. It's not Russia who's driving this necessarily, or the U.S. There's a dynamic going on between these powers that's not totally within the control of any of them, and that's what makes the whole situation so extremely explosive. And there is a fact. The quote you read from Medvedev is very, very chilling. And the United States is fully aware of this, fully aware of the stakes, fully aware of what they're messing with. And what you have, it's a situation right now that we're facing. It's like you have a very high stakes poker game, and people have been betting and raising and calling, and then another card is dealt. And there's another round of betting, of raising, of calling, and some players are, nobody's dropping out in this game. And now everybody's got so much on the table. And what we just saw is if they really push a whole bunch more chips in. But the problem is these chips are human beings. These chips are Russians and Ukrainians. And right now, these chips are very potentially all of humanity that's being bet in a game of what? Of who is going to dominate Europe, and by extension then the key, principal and strategic parts of the world. So this is the danger of this moment is very, very, it's very fraught, and the stakes are very high.
They don't go out and say, well, we're ratcheting up this war to contend for our imperial domination for each of our empires. That's what we're doing. No, they pose this as a contest of, particularly to the people in Western Europe and in the U.S., as a conflict between autocracy and democracy. I just would like to play a little bit of the answer to the first question in the second interview that Sunsara and I did with Bob Avakian on the RNL Show on the war in Ukraine, where he speaks about this autocracy versus democracy. Take a listen.
I mean, I just have to comment, like you got all these people that pretend that they're progressive and whatever, and they're all going right along with U.S. imperialism and this, and under the banner that Biden and all these people are putting out about this is a world, this is a contest in the United States and throughout the world between democracy and autocracy. Trump is an autocrat. Putin is an autocrat. Xi Jinping is an autocrat. Of course, they don't talk about their own autocrats, like the heads of the government, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, you can go down the list, that are all part of their alliance. Hungary, Poland, what have you. Those are all autocratic governments. But there are autocratic governments. Like they said about the Shah of Iran back in 1978 when the uprising was occurring, which eventually led to his overthrow. There was an article that said the Shah, in one of the major newspapers in this country that said, the Shah of Iran may be a despot, but he's our despot. So, our autocrats are okay, but the ones that are challenging our dominance in the world and our ability to plunder and slaughter people all over the world, which is what they've been doing forever, those autocrats are no good. This is not a battle, just even looking beneath the surface, you can see that this is a battle between imperialist powers, all of which, on both sides, have whole histories of horrendous atrocities and, base themselves on vicious exploitation of people and oppression of people all over the world. This is what's at stake.
Yeah, I just want to take 1 minute to somewhat respond to and elaborate on that. First, this empire is very real. It's children in Africa mining minerals, as little children doing this in terrible, terrible conditions. It's people and, women, young women in Bangladesh or Vietnam, Cambodia, who are creating the garments we wear. There's the people in Mexico growing the winter vegetables for your table while the water table in their villages is going down and arsenic is seeping into it. All these things have to be, one, that's where this great standard of living comes from, that enables them to, for certain sections of the people, loosen the chain a little bit. And number two, this is defended by wars, where people are up in arms about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that invasion was unjust and wrong, and it's been murderous. But the United States, to build up this empire, the platform on which this rests, has killed, if you count it up, over somewhere between 7 and 9 million people just since World War II. Not during World War II, since World War II, as they've put this empire together. You go to Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, where they sponsored a coup, Central America, where they bankrolled people, all these things. It's and to talk about the United States has suddenly changed. The United States is suddenly, in this case, a force for good that isn't worried about and isn't being driven by the same concerns that have driven it always in all its wars, is just, you're telling yourself fairy tales and you're letting yourself be played. And people who should know better are doing this too. And this is why we have to go out and we have to really wage a fight with people over how they're looking at this and what they're thinking.
I think that's important. And just to say one more thing about it. The interests of humanity are not the same as the interests of the ruling classes of the entire world right now. And these ruling classes contend with each other. They're fighting. It's an expand or die, dog-eat-dog system, the capitalist imperial system. They contend with each other. And you can see it here. You can see it in the struggle over Taiwan and China, and between the U.S. and these countries. We have to get out of thinking the way they think, tailing them, doing what they say, have them present choices to us and say, well, I guess it's either support Ukraine or support Putin. I guess it's either support Trump or DeSantis or support Biden. No, you have to get out of that thinking and think about the interests of humanity that are not the same as the interests of the imperialists. To really get into the stakes for humanity here, I just want to do two things. One, I want to strongly recommend, not only that you watch the interview that we did with Bob Avakian, both the section on Ukraine, but the whole thing, but also go to revcom.us, where we have, there's articles on Ukraine right on the homepage, but that can lead you to a resource page that really goes into this in a great deal of depth and from many different angles. And when you face something of this magnitude, it is a responsibility to understand everything you can about it and to know the truth about this. And then we should get into it and debate it. About the things that you actually might disagree with that's there. But this is too important to ignore, and you cannot be passive in the face of what is going down.
I fully agree, man. And the stakes, again, this is very, Biden himself said this is Armageddon. You saw that movie Armageddon Time, or heard the class say? Biden himself said, oh, it might be Armageddon. And they are risking everything for they're driven to do that exactly by that expand or die mandate that they face, which is what they need to survive. If they don't, it is expand or die.
But the thing is, people can't accept this. I find it a bit insane that the future of humanity is at stake now, and people aren't flooding the streets around this. Oh, well, we only got two choices. What are we going to do? No, you don't only have two choices. You could stand up and act in the interests of humanity. And look, everywhere in the world, there's not going to be a different choice unless we make that different choice. And this is a show about revolution, nothing less. And we've got a leadership in Bob Avakian. We have a strategy that he's developed, and he's analyzed that we have a moment right now that's really unique, where a country as powerful as the U.S. could potentially be, this system could be overthrown. And the reason this could happen is because there's tremendous contention at the top of society, and they're constantly ripping up the norms of what have been before. You saw that around the Roe versus Wade thing, which Sunsara is going to do a segment on later in this program. And even this war, and maybe in some ways, especially this war over Ukraine, could heighten the situation for millions of people, including here. And it's important that people actually see there's another way, including standing up against what they're doing and this proxy war that is cynically using the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder on the part of the U.S. and NATO bloc.
That war is not going to have that effect, though, unless people who do understand the stakes, or who can be won to understand the stakes, go out and fight with other people over what they're being sucked into. And is what you said, the alternative that actually does exist. We have a constitution that for the new Socialist Republic of North America that Bob Avakian wrote. And one of the elements of that is a whole different way of approaching the world, which includes, among other things, supporting revolution all over the world, but also a total renunciation of the production and use of nuclear weapons. This new revolutionary government, this new society, would never countenance the kind of mass slaughter that all these imperialist powers feel they must be able to do and threaten in order to keep their system going.
So it's important that people see the different kind of society that we could bring about through an actual revolution. Earlier, I spoke about the importance for people to be standing up. We raised slogans last year: no U.S., NATO war with Russia, no World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. Now I'd like to go to the end of that excerpt from the answer to the first question in the second interview that Bob Avakian did with the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show that really gets to how do we look at this situation with the war in Ukraine.
So, this is the dangers that are going on, and all this ridiculous stuff, people sticking their heads down or, I stay in my own lane. You think if there's a nuclear war, it won't touch your lane? I mean, come on, let's get fucking serious around here. You think if U.S. and China go to war, your lane is going to be somehow, I'm just going along in my lane. I mean, people need to wake up and get serious. This is a contest between oppressors, the world's leading oppressors, with the U.S. number one. Yes, USA number one oppressor and plunderer in the entire world for decades. And, it's up to us to oppose our own ruling class. Yes, we also oppose Russian imperialism. Yes, we also oppose Chinese imperialism. But we're not living in Russia, and we're not living in China. And if we were living in Russia and China, our primary focus would be on opposing our ruling class where we were. We live in the United States. All these crimes committed by these imperialists are done in our name. Supposedly, the army goes out there to protect our freedoms and blah, blah, blah. They go out there to plunder people so that U.S. imperialism can suck the blood of literally billions of people. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go on the website, revcom.us, and read the articles by Raymond Latta, which get into the parasitism of U.S. imperialism, how it is an international exploiter and super exploiter of people in the global south or the third world, the poorer countries of the world, and what this has to do with what the U.S. looks like internally and how it thrives. Even the consumer goods that people have are cheapened, more affordable to the massive population here because of the way that people are viciously exploited. More than 150 million children in the third world who have no childhood. Hundreds of millions of women, like those in Bangladesh working in factories, making the stuff that goes to Walmart or whatever. People all over the world in similar situations. It is our responsibility to oppose this primarily, while we also oppose these other imperialists. This is where we live. This is being done, and all these massive crimes, and now the threat of existential threat of nuclear war. A threat to that's what existential means, threat to the existence of humanity. All that's being done in our name. And idiots like, Steve Van Sant aside, now I'm giving him a break by saying idiocy. We have a responsibility to first and foremost oppose our own imperialist ruling class and what it's doing. And more generally, I've made a statement and I'll make it again. The masses of people in the world, and this is very acutely and urgently posed now, the masses of people in the world cannot any longer afford. It was always terrible that these are the people ruling the world, but it's now acutely posed. We can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and to determine the destiny of humanity. They need to be overthrown as quickly as possible.
Hey, I'm Pros with the RNL team, and this past week was the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision that gave women the constitutional right to abortion, which no longer exists because the fascist-packed Supreme Court ripped it away just last year. We're going to be getting deeper into this, but first, a couple of videos from the RevCom social media.
Biblical roles of a wife.
Let's go!
The Bible is a thoroughly patriarchal document from beginning to end, from the book of Genesis all the way through to Paul's epistles and all the rest of it. Horrific patriarchy, in fact, if you look at it. I mean, women should be killed for having sex before they're married. If they're not virgins when they get married, you have to show the bloody sheet to prove that they were virgins. I mean, first of all, not all women bleed when they first have sex, but leaving that aside, you have to show the bloody sheet. Or else the woman should be put to death in the town hall or the town center. This is a patriarchal document, so you can go changing all the pronouns, but you can't change the patriarchy. God is still going to be God the Father, the patriarchal oppressor.
I went out yesterday to the March for Life, aka the March for Female Enslavement, and interviewed these people to bring you what their program actually is and what they're fighting for. And there's a Bible quote that I want to read for you. So wives must be in every respect submissive to their husbands.
I think it's important to really have that going back to the way we were, where there was that foundation and you had a mom that was at home, and that's going to better society when we go back to that.
But as the church is submissive to Christ, so wives must in every respect be submissive to their husband.
I agree. I agree with it, yeah. We view equality differently now, where it's like women can do exactly what men can do, but that's just not true. There's a certain authority that men have that I think women should be respecting.
What do you think the legal status of abortion should be across the country?
I think that it should be considered a crime, and if you commit a crime and go to jail.
Should they face jail time or the death penalty if they get an abortion and have no regrets?
They have to be punished.
Having watched all of that, keep in mind that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a part of over an hour and 40 minutes of interviews I conducted with dozens of people who expressed a desire to force women back into the traditional role of a housewife, servant of the family, and submissive to her husband. And on top of that, people expressing the need and the desire to punish and jail women who have abortions. The question of abortion is a concentration of the oppression of women in society and whether or not they're going to have the ability to participate as full human beings or be enslaved. Forced motherhood is female enslavement. Now, we're going to bring you some highlights from an important program that was held just a few days ago at Revolution Books in Harlem, New York City, to mark the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, between Sunsara Taylor, the co-host of this, the Revolution Nothing Less show, and a co-initiator of Rise Up for Abortion Rights, and Fran Luck, a longtime radical feminist and the host of Joy of Resistance Multicultural Feminist Radio on WBAI in New York City, hosted by Raymond Latta at Revolution Books. Sunsara Taylor presented first and brought alive the reality that denying the right to abortion and forcing women to have children against their will is female enslavement.
But let's go further. Have you asked yourself why? Why do we live in a society where Dark Ages theocrats, several of them appointed by a white supremacist fascist thug who openly bragged about sexually assaulting women, why does this Dark Ages Supreme Court get to sit and dictate the lives of women and girls? Why is it that everywhere around the globe, women are beaten and raped, stalked and degraded, turned into sexual objects and pimped out, or shrouded and punished if they have sex at all? And why has it been this way for thousands of years? And have you ever let yourself dream, I mean really dream, of a world where women could walk the earth free of fear of harassment, brutality, free of fear of rape, or any form of shame or control over them and their bodies and their reproduction? Have you let yourself dream of a society and a world where all forms of oppression that women face, and all other forms of oppression against Black people and immigrants, against LGBTQ people and others, all forms of oppression are uprooted and overcome?
She also exposed the roots of this attack on women in the nature and dynamics of this system we live under, capitalism, imperialism, and urged people to lift their sights and unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for a real revolution, and unite everyone who can be united to beat back this fascist assault on women now. To get deeper into this, watch Sunsara's segment on episode 131 of the RNL Show titled Make Roe's Reversal a Rallying Cry for Revolution. Now, let's go to an excerpt from Fran Luck's presentation, where she brings alive important history and perspective and a taste of the radical struggle that went into winning abortion rights in the first place. One of the things she talks about was consciousness-raising groups that women organized as a part of the women's liberation struggle of the late 1960s and early 70s. This was one important stream of a whole mix of radical upsurge and other changes that were taking place at a time which fed into the 1973 Supreme Court decision to legalize abortion nationwide in Roe v. Wade.
Okay, so here we are, and Roe versus Wade has been overturned. This demon, this horrible thing that was on the horizon for so long, And it has happened. It was, of course, predictable, and yet it's still a shock. And Scalise, who was the highest-ranking person at the Right to Life March, that's, of course, in giant quotes, that Right to Life phrase, said, this is just the beginning. You know, we're just going to go on. And they're already giving all these signals. They're going after medication abortion, which is important. And they want to get rid of any way any woman could possibly sneak around all these bans. They are threatening to put doctors in prison. They are threatening to put women in prison. They're really on the march. They're going after contraception. They're going after in vitro fertilization. I mean, you name it. They're going after free speech because they're aiding and abetting abortion also includes speaking about abortion, right? So that's what they would like. The question is, what would we like? That's really the issue. We know what they're going to do. What are we going to do? What are we going to demand? I think this is a question that has to be looked at with specificity. What you demand has a lot to do with what you wind up getting, which history has really shown. So I'm going to talk about two things. One is, how did we get Roe v. Wade in the first place, which isn't much talked about. It's kind of shrouded in that misty place that women's history somehow disappears into. And it really needs to be taken out of that foggy place. And the other question is to actually look at Roe. Now, this is a disaster. I'm not in the least underplaying that. However, it's important to understand that Roe itself was a compromise, an enormous compromise with the radical women who were demanding something much more radical at the time that the abortion movement was taking off. And that very much more radical thing was repeal of all abortion laws. Cindy Sisler, who is one of the leaders of that movement, said, when you're looking for a repeal, when she was trying to say what repeal would look like, she would hold up a blank sheet of paper. Nothing on it, okay? In other words, it shouldn't be singled out as any special kind of medical procedure, okay? It's just another one, because every time it's singled out, an overlay of so-called morality is put on it. That is why it is singled out. That is what happens to it. The morality police kind of come in and limit it in every kind of way. So it should just be a medical procedure. Of course, it should be done under sanitary conditions, as any other medical procedure would be, period. Women started talking to each other. And one of the things they talked about was abortion. And the women who were speaking about abortion had usually never spoken about it before, because you never spoke about that. It was, as they say, hidden in fear and shame. So they started talking about it, and out of that feeling that, hey, I'm not alone in this, all the other women are feeling this way too, came actions. So this first action was the disruption of this hearing. And the hearing was in 1969. It was 14 men and a nun who were going to decide the fate of women. So they got up in the middle of the hearing, and Kathy Fairchild, I think they drew lots to see who would do it. She led off and she yelled, "We are the experts. Let the women speak. We are the real experts." Well, they kicked them out of the meeting. But there were television crews there. So the women went into the hall and they conducted a speak out where they talked about their abortions, then illegal. This was filmed. It got on TV. The next day, most of the newspapers in New York City had headlines that said things like, "Gals squeal for repeal." Okay, that was a classic New York Post kind of headline. But, it got in the papers, right? This was the beginning. From there, they decided to do their own speak out, and they held one at Washington Square Methodist Church, and 12 women got up and talked about their then illegal abortions, risking arrest, risking being fired from their jobs, etc. And then speak outs started to spread, just as consciousness raising had spread. It's about 1969.
Lastly, we want to show you a few highlights of what was a very rich and lively discussion that followed between Fran and Sunsara and the audience. The full program will soon be available at revolutionbooksnyc.org.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that we should live in a society where abortion is treated just like any other form of healthcare. And I very much agree. But I think we have to, and I think you do, but I don't think most people do, we have to recognize why abortion is singled out. Why have 11 abortion providers been assassinated? Why have clinics been bombed? Why is there pervasive violence and threat? Why have all these, as you were saying, trap laws been passed to shut down clinics based on really things that have no medical benefit to women, to the patients, but are just about shutting down clinics based on technicalities? Why is this targeting abortion in a way that doesn't happen to heart surgeons or people who, psychologists or, you know what I mean? Why is it singled out?
Not because it's healthcare. That's not the reason it's being attacked, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, not because it's healthcare, but because it speaks to the very place that has been given to women in society. That's basically what it speaks to. It speaks to, can women really be free people with full rights in a society with male supremacy that is exacerbated by capitalism? What is the place? I mean, we see this on so many fronts. We see this in the resistance to any form of childcare, for instance. All these things that give women autonomy, okay, that make it possible for a woman to have a family should she wish, and also work outside of the home. All of these things there is enormous resistance to. So that does speak to that, whatever you want. It's a Christian vision, but it's also a part of every religious orthodoxy and certainly state religions to have women have a certain place, creating babies for armies, for the army, for the factory, what have you, to serve and to in turn be oppressed. I mean, women getting out of that role scares the shit out of them, and that is really what we're fighting about here.
And I go to school in New York. I go to a historically women's school called Barnard College. I've kind of always thought about this and wondered about this, and it's funny and kind of hypocritical, because I'm studying political science, but I want to be a lawyer, different kind of law, not politician. But I am curious what you think about government and working in government. I always said that I wanted to be a politician, but then kind of seeing the way that politics works in this country, you have to compromise. You could go in as a radical and you can't really get exactly where you want to get if, not that you can't have those beliefs, but there's kind of a midpoint that it always gets to. And while I do think that it will kind of always be like that and the system will always be like that, I also wonder what kind of changes could happen with my generation in terms of pushing more progressive representatives into the House and the Senate. And so I'm just kind of wondering, in general, I know you talked about how we should stray away and work more as people, but both obviously could be helpful as well, or maybe not, or I don't really know. That's my question.
Fran, do you want to go first?
If you ever did get into government, you could at least try to be honest. I think that's really important. I went to the swearing in of Deborah Glick, who's a state senator, I think. No, she's not a senator. She's an assembly person who I knew previously. And not only did she take her vow on the women's Bible with her female partner, but what she said to the audience was, I am only as good as you are out there in the street. I need you out there in the street if I'm going to do anything. So I have a mass in back of me. So if we want to talk about interactions with politicians, that would be one of the best kinds. And that would be the kind of politician to be. Now I followed her, and she of course had to make her own compromises. So you're very right about that system. Nevertheless, that works to put some fire into their asses if we're out there.
Well, I would go back to, I think in the question and where Fran ended, it was important to recognize that when you go into the political structures of this system, I thought the audience member had it correctly. You might still feel and believe certain things, but you can't act on them. You are forced to compromise with the dynamics of this system. And I'll go back to the analogy that I gave in my presentation. And it's an analogy that Bob Avakian used in the interviews that I did with him, which is a very useful and accurate. It's a very scientific. Every analogy has limitations, but it captures something very important. We live in a society, imagine it's like a house, and the laws and the culture are the rooms we live in. They're what govern our lives day to day. But underneath that house is a foundation. And that foundation sets the terms for what happens in that house. It sets the terms for what the politicians can and cannot do. In another presentation, Bob Avakian gives the example how, because the foundation of the house is capitalism, imperialism. It's a global system of exploitation. It's a system that has many forms of social oppression woven into and reinforced and fueled and driven forward by that mode of production of exploitation. The oppression of women is woven into that. The white supremacy is woven into that, and it plays out in the culture and the laws and how we live our lives. But he gives an example of how under this system you could never have the right to eat. You literally, what could be more essential to human survival and sustenance than the right to eat? And yet we don't have that right to eat. I was just doing research on this. 1 in 8 children in the U.S. goes hungry. And that's in the U.S. 1 in 5 black children, because it's a much higher rate for black children, go hungry. And then you look around the world, 10,000 children die every single day from hunger or related issues on this planet. And yet there's food for people. But you can't pass a law that says everybody has the right to eat, because once you do that, if people had the food, then you could take it from the grocery store. How do they restock it if they're not given money for it? They have to restock. They have to pay for the shipping, for the produce that they get. It's a system. It's a global system. You want a different system. You need you want different laws and culture that are really on the side of the people. You need a different system. So I would say, no, don't lend your heart and your desire for change to being a functionary of a system that can only work one way. Yes, you can stretch it this way or that way, but fundamentally, it's still going to be an oppressive system. Lift your sights. Become part of fighting for a different system. Be a representative, a people's representative in the new Socialist Republic of North America, the system that we would implement after a revolution. This is a very visionary document that Bob Avakian wrote. It's part of what makes him the most important political thinker and leader in the world today. He's actually done the work to say how we could live differently, a different economy, a different education system, different social relations, and that back people up, don't force you to compromise, but actually enable you and unleash that desire for radical change, and including all the way through the fight to break thousands of years of traditional chains of patriarchy and shame and stigma on women and differently gendered people is a driving force in ensuring this society goes forward to the emancipation of humanity. Become part of this. Lift your sights and fight like hell out in the streets against what's being done to women and others right now as you learn about it. Don't let this continue, and don't lower your sights, and just work within what this system tells you is possible.
In closing, we want to leave you with this powerful clip from the Bob Avakian interviews that was part of this program at Revolution Books.
I will say, just on a personal note, that for me, in my own development as a revolutionary and communist, I would say it has been a lifelong process of a continually deepening understanding of, the horrific nature of the oppression of women, but also the pivotal and central role of the struggle for the emancipation of women in the overall communist revolution to emancipate all humanity from every form of oppression and exploitation. So, this really is, crucial in the whole struggle. There is not going to be any liberating struggle, any liberating real revolution that doesn't have right at the heart of it, at the core of it, the emancipation of women from every way in which they're degraded and debased and oppressed and, violently suppressed. And, this is a lot of struggle. Now, look, I talked about backward shit that people are into, but there also are, positive things where, not only among young women, but even some of the young men, including among the oppressed, have taken a better stand on this because they can identify, at least on as a first step, beginning basis, they can identify with people who are being oppressed. And then sometimes it's there's more largeness of mind involved. They don't want oppression of any kind, as much as they understand that. They're against it. So there's contention out there. But, in order, like I said, in order to have this revolution, this has to be at the core of it. It's not the only form of oppression. It has to be uprooted, obviously, but it is right at the core of transforming the whole world. This historic and, thousands of year old oppression of women in different forms in different societies, and it's been completely bound up with the division of society overall into masters and slaves, into oppressors and oppressors, exploiters and exploiters. You go back in history, it's completely bound up with that and has run through every form of oppression and exploitation, going back to days of slavery right up to the modern capitalism, imperialism, and all its forms of oppression.
So I'm back here with Atlas, a key member of our RNL team, and we began the show together. Now we're going to close it out and talk more about what people can do to, and what we're asking people to do to be a part of spreading this show as part of spreading an actual revolution.
Well, the first thing I think people should really think about is what they saw on today's show. Just think about the big questions that are being dealt with. Possible nuclear war and the trajectory things are heading on. The oppression of women brought up very viscerally, but then also this leader that you saw on this show. If you haven't already yet, you need to see these Bob Avakian interviews. You need to find out about this guy. I'm very inspired by this person. He brings me a lot of hope. He's someone has a lot of heart for humanity, and anybody like that should really be heard from. But even more than that, this is somebody who's actually got answers to why we're in this mess and how we could actually get out of it and get to a world that's actually fit for human beings, a world you would want to really live in. And that's got to be seen by a lot more people. Just think for yourself, Andy, and the audience, how much do you think hope matters? How powerful of a thing do you think that hope actually is? Hope that's real and not phony hope, just ginning yourself up that everything's going to be all right. So that's the first thing. I mean, these Bob Avakian interviews, they need to be seen by everybody in society. They need to get very far out there.
Atlas, I share your enthusiasm for the interviews. It was a lot of work to figure out the questions we wanted to ask, and then his answers are just, kind of off the charts in terms of the depth of them, the breadth of them, the stories, the humor, the whole thing. And so we did a lot of work, Sunsara and myself, on actually preparing that. But what I want to just highlight for people, we did those interviews and we turned around essentially an hour-and-a-half show, 2-hour show, followed by another hour and 45-minute show in just 3 weeks, one after the other. And this guy here, as well as the rest of the crew, put in a lot of effort on that. And really, we only have 2 good computers to do this. You can go watch some other shows and you'll see this list of personnel and equipment and all this, so we need more people, Atlas, working on the show. We need a community of people around this show, and we need money to be able to have more than one good computer and then be scrounging for extra, hard drives and all this. It's not any way to do something about preparing to build a whole radically new world. So how do you see that? I mean, I admire you guys worked through the night. I think after 4 or 5 nights you hadn't slept, but we got them done. So why don't we talk about this? This is actually a problem of the revolution that we want to put before people.
Yeah, well, the simple answer to this is that the revolution needs funds. You got to become a sustainer of the show. You got to donate to the show, and it's a part of a big fund drive that we're doing to really put revolution on the map in the next year. Let's have 2023 be the year that revolution gets put on the map. And so we have this, it's called Patreon. It's patreon.com/therevcoms. This is like a website where you can make a regular monthly contribution. And that money goes to so that we can get more computers, so that we can get better cameras, better lighting, and also to take advertisements out so that the show can spread to people who have never heard of it.
Yeah, that last point's very important. People, social media is not that social unless you actually pay for it in the main, especially for a show like this. And so your contributions means we can advertise for this. You did a whole bit on the live stream we did as part of that fund drive starting off a few weeks back, where you talked about how these advertisements have driven more people and let them know for the first time about this, because, the way this gets popularized is, yes, out in the world, we put out, we need to print palm cards and posters and all this kind of stuff about the show. But also, we need to place advertising on other shows. We need to get out there, and all of you watching need to spread this. People connecting with other people, talking about it, getting into debates about it. If you don't agree with something, and you surely don't agree with everything we're saying here, then raise your questions on our site, but raise them elsewhere. Start a debate, start a discussion, but a serious discussion, not just saying, revolution, that'll never happen, boo-hoo-hoo. Actually get into what's being said. And the more we do that, the better it'll be. And look, I want to just say one thing, Atlas. I really appreciate the people who are patrons now, but as I think it's not been right that we really haven't done anything with that other than accepted the money every month that comes in. And we're going to change that right now.
Yeah, well, that brings me to another thing. We really want a community to form around this show. And there's different ways into that. I mean, there's, of course, very importantly, dropping what you think in the comment section of this video and all the episodes that we have. We want to get back to you, and some of the things that you comment, the questions you have, the things that you're thinking, you may find them on the show itself. And then, too, my understanding is that the Patreon, there's actually an idea about special things that might be going on for the community and Patreon.
Yeah, so we have to figure a lot of that out. But one thing we want to do is at the end of next month, February, we're going to do a Zoom. And that's going to become a regular feature. I think the first one will probably be with Sunsara or myself, or even both of us, if we get enough new patrons on there. And this will be your chance, if you're a regular contributor to the show, to actually speak with us and speak with other people who are supporters of this show. And we're going to hear your questions. We're going to get into them. We're going to have some discussion. This should be a regular feature, just as one of the things we're going to get. And people can contribute at different levels, but I think at least for this first time, every denomination, whether it's $3 a month or $300 a month, are going to be invited to be a part of this.
Yeah, Andy, I really want to double down on that. There's nothing more important that your money could be going to right now than donating to this show, becoming a Patreon, so that we can really, all of us together, put revolution on the map this year in 2023. Andy?
We're way past the time when we can tolerate one police killing after another police killing. We should be way past the time when we can just say, that Zelensky, he's wonderful. These Ukrainians, I'm going to wear a little pin. This system is a fucking nightmare for people. And so you need to give not just what you can, but what's really needed. So bring about a whole other way, Atlas, a whole other way we could do this. Sometimes it's just so upsetting you can't even for those of us who understand the possibility, the necessity, and what of revolution and what it could bring into being, even we can sort of say, turn away from it until you wake up and you look at this reality and say, God damn it, it doesn't have to be this way. We got to get the word out to people about this leadership, about this strategy, about this way to go forward. And people need to see this show and learn this every week. We're not doing this because we want to see ourselves on YouTube. We're doing this because this is part of emancipating all of humanity and going for an actual revolution, and not playing around on the borders of things and feeling good about ourselves. And we've got one little improvement over here. And meanwhile, people are being ground into the dirt. 200,000 people lost already in this war in Ukraine, with far worse potentially to come. So yes, I agree with you. Contribute all you can to this campaign. There's nothing more important than putting your money behind what could be a radically new and far better world. So I think we probably should end this show right now, because I'm feeling like I'm going to get going and keep you here for another hour. That wouldn't be a good idea. So we'll see you next Thursday night. You'll be here, and maybe we'll get Atlas out from behind the camera and the sound machines some more. I like having you sitting here too, and I'm sure Sunsara would like to sit here with you as well. So again, Thursday night, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, and 8 p.m. Eastern time. We'll see you next week. Good night.